So in this video, we're going to show you exactly how to remove and install bearings in the rear wheel of your Harley-Davidson motorcycle with or without ABS. And just to let you know, we're going to be coming out with a front wheel bearing removal and install. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you're notified when we come out with those videos. Welcome back, Bikeaholics. Ryan Urlacher here, lawabidingbiker.com. I always thank you, that's right, you, for checking back in. Now, we do know some guys that change their bearings at every tire change just for good measure, but Harley actually recommends that you inspect them each tire change and replace as necessary. And you do this by inserting a finger in the inner bearing race and turning it in both directions, and it should move freely and smoothly. And if you note any drag, rough rotation, or abnormal noises, then you should definitely replace the bearings. And if you have this much play, like on my bike, you should definitely replace them. I likely wouldn't have made it on our upcoming long distance trip. All right, so as you can see, there's a lot of play there as he moves the wheel back and forth. Now we removed the spacer there, so you can see the bearings on the axle and you can get a good idea of how much play there is in the bearing. So on my 2014 Street Glide Special behind me on the lift, it actually takes 4 bearings on the rear wheel, 3 non-ABS and 1 ABS. They run about $30 each for Harley branded bearings. And if you're running a non-ABS touring model, you'll still need 4 bearings, but you won't need the specific ABS one. And if you have a non-touring, you're just simply going to need 2 bearings. And so this video will work for you too. So in this video, we're going to be using a Jim's bearing installation and removal tool, which will make the job a lot easier and make sure it's done properly. Now I'll link to that tool in the description below, and we're going to show you how to use it in this video. Now in this video, we're starting with the rear wheel off the motorcycle, but have no fear because we have a very detailed rear wheel removal and install video for you. I'll pop a card on the screen here and link in the description below so you can get your wheel to this point. And with that said, what do you say we get wrenching, huh? All right, so the first thing he's going to do is remove the sprocket, and it's not bolted on the touring models. It just pops off like so. If you have a non-touring, it's going to be bolted on there. And underneath there is a rubber isolator, and that just pulls out. And we'll set that aside along with that sprocket because we're going to change the bearings in that sprocket a bit later. So after you remove the rubber isolator, you can see there's another bearing in there. And on your non-touring models, this is how it's going to be. They're just basically going to be a bearing on each side of the wheel. We have the extra 2 bearings, again, because the sprocket comes off along with the rubber isolator. Okay, so he's flipped the wheel over here, and this is our brake side. They'll also refer to it as the primary side. The reason they say that is the primary side is always the side that your magnetic ABS sensor is on, and obviously you take that off when you remove the rear wheel. And so this is the bad bearing, and he's going to go in there, and you saw it while it was on the bike too, but you can just see how much play that has in it. So definitely needs to be replaced. All right, so we kind of want to show you how this Jim's bearing removal and press works before we actually get started. Now in his right hand is the removal tool, and the expander dowel is in his left hand. Now in a moment, we're going to tap the removal tool down into the bearing and the channel there, but we'll show you that. Once that's done, then you're actually going to take the expander dowel, and it will go through just like an axle. It'll go through the wheel, and it will line up with the removal tool. And you can see how it's flared on the end there. Well, then we're going to put a nut on the right side there. On his right side, he'll point to it. And the other side is just a hex head, and he'll put a tool in there, and then he'll start tightening it together. And it will force that flared portion into the removal tool, thus jamming, up against the bearing basically, and that will allow us to pull the bearing out. So that's kind of how that tool works. All right, in a moment, we're going to put the bearing removal tool down in there, and you'll see a channel down in there. That is basically where the bearing sits over the spacer. And you'll see in a moment the tool has a lip, and we want to hammer it down lightly, and you'll hear it click into that channel. So that's what you're looking for, and we'll show you further here. It comes with 3 different sizes of removal tools for whichever bearings you're doing. This touring model is 25 millimeter. That's the one he has. And he'll note that there is a lip on the bottom that we mentioned. That is what we're going to try to pop down into the channel in between the bearing and the spacer. Also in the kit comes a 3/4 inch and 1 inch. So just be aware, but you'll know right away if it fits your bearings. And so now he can just put that in. And again, just one bearing on this side and one on the other. And you can see he hammered it in just a little ways there. just to get it started. And you heard it right there. You don't want to just hammer it down because you could pass that channel in there, but get it started and then you can listen for that snap as it gets down in there. Okay, so he's gonna, before we do this, he's gonna put a little oil on the threads of the expander tool there, and he'll also put some oil down on the removal tool threads. Okay, and he's on the sprocket side there, and he's gonna put that expander dowel through where the axle will go normally, and he's pushing it into the other side, of course, into the removal tool there. And you can see it popping out there. Now he'll go on with the main removal body there. And he's gonna go on with his large brass flat washer there, followed by the large nut. All right, and he's just finger tightening this, just kind of get it seated up against the brass washer. That's the actual nut. We'll turn in a minute against the main puller body, and that'll actually pull it. All right, now he's got the other flat washer, and you can see it just fits over the other end of the expander dowel, which is pushed all the way through, and then the smaller nut goes on the end of the expander dowel. All right, and so just to give you a visual here, on the sprocket side, he's got a 3/8 hex head, and it's obviously lined up and on the end of the expander dowel, and he'll spin this around. On the other side is an 11/16 inch socket that he's got on there, and he's going to put that over the smaller one. Now this torque wrench is set to 100 inch-pounds, and basically that will let us know right now he's pulling that expander dowel into the removal tool body, and by setting it at 100 inch-pounds, we know that it's pulled through and flared properly. All right, so in a moment, we're actually going to pull the rotor side bearing here. Not that old a bike, so we shouldn't have a problem, but if we do, the procedure for that is adding some heat to the bearings with a standard heat gun, as you see we have there, and you would apply heat just to the bearing. Those stickers come in the tool removal kit there, and you would basically place those on a couple different locations on the rotor itself, and then you would apply heat just to the bearing. And those stickers turn black when they reach 210 degrees Fahrenheit, and you would know that that you have reached the right heat. Again, don't put heat directly to the stickers, but just the bearing. After you heat them properly, then you can make your attempt. So now we're actually going to remove the bearing. That's a 5/8 wrench there, and that's because there's a flat side around the threads there on both sides of the removal tool. And then he's just got a crescent wrench, basic crescent wrench there. It's a large nut, and now he's holding the removal tool so it doesn't spin while he's cranking that nut down against the main puller body. And you can see down in there underneath the main removal body, you can see the bearing as he's turning actually coming up there, and he'll just keep turning away there. And there we go. It looks like he got it popped the rest of the way. All right, so with the rotor side bearing removed now, he can go ahead and pull that spacer out of there, and he'll just clean everything up a little bit. All right, so that's the bearing we took out of the rotor side here, and you'll just want to note exactly how you took it out. Now, we're going to replace it with Harley bearings, and it has Harley branded bearings in it. You can see the one side, the bottom side that goes down is orange, while the top side will be gray. Also, there's a groove to the inside. That's the side that goes down on the actual bearing, sealed bearing unit itself. So just make good note of that. So he's got his 3/8 hex head on there, and his 11/16 wrench, because we're going to have to take this apart to get the bearing out of there. All right, and he's going to go ahead and remove that nut all the way off and the washer off that expander dowel. And he's going to take the large nut off the removal tool there, and he can slide the main removal body off along with that brass washer. And now you can see the flared portion of the expander tool is out of the body of the removal tool. He'll just give it a few pops with the hammer there, and now he can pull that entire sealed bearing off there. All right, and he's just going to flip this over now to the sprocket side, and of course there's a bearing on that side. We're going to do the same exact thing here. Okay, so we are looking down inside the sprocket side. This is where the rubber isolator goes, of course, that we've pulled out to expose that bearing. And now the spacer's not in there anymore. So you just take that extractor tool, and he's just popping it down till he feels it go below the bearing. And then he'll pull up a little bit to seat to make sure the lip on there is good. And it has enough tension that it's not going to fall through without the spacer in there. Okay, and just give you a little bit different angle here. That's the expander dowel that he's pushing through there on that hex head wrench. And it went through that side, the removal tool. He's going to put the main body on there, on with his big brass washer, on with the large nut, which obviously will only fit the removal tool threads there, on with his small washer, over the end of the expander dowel and on with the small nut there. Okay, with his 11/16 socket there on his torque wrench, he's tightening that down 100 inch-pounds. And on the other side, of course, he's holding the expander dowel with that hex head wrench, and you heard it pop there. So we know the flared portion is inside the body. All right, with his 5/8 box end wrench there, he's got it on the flat sides there of the extractor tool, and he's got his crescent wrench on the large nut there, and he's just turning there, and you saw it there ease up. That means the bearing's on its way out. And you can see he's just actually turning both there at the same time, turning them against each other. All right, so as he pulls this out, he's just going to note that the bottom side of this one is black. Okay, so some things you'll want to pay attention to and note. There are 4 bearings on the rear wheel of this touring model. We've now taken out 2 of them. You can see his sprocket sitting over there. We had that set aside. That still has 2 in there. And the main thing you'll want to note is that 3 of the bearings look exactly the same on both sides. So there's no color to them, really. One side of that has some small imprinted writing. That's the side when you replace them on the replacement Harley bearings that's going to go up. All right. Now, your ABS bearing, you only have 1 of them. And that's obviously on your rotor side. And you can see the groove. That's the side that goes down, and the red or orange side color goes down. Again, the only one with the orange or red is your ABS sensor bearing, because it's encoded and it goes against your speed sensor. All right, so of course, this comes in the same kit as the installer tool. This is the removal portion, long threaded bolt. Now, eventually this is going to go through, of course, where the axle goes through, but we just want to show you how you set up the hardware on it. So the first thing he's going to slide on there is a bearing, and that comes with it. That's not one of the wheel bearings. That comes with the installer kit. That's just so it doesn't bind up. Next, he's going to put on his backing plate, and it goes right up against the bearing there. Now, at this point, it would actually go through the wheel, and we'd be putting this stuff on the other side. So we want to show you, once that bolt was through the wheel, you would take your bearing and put it on. Now remember, this is our ABS side bearing, and it's got the groove, and it's also got the red, orange bottom, whatever you want to call it. That goes to the downside. And he put that right on the installer there, and small washer, and then his nut. And so that would be just like that on each side. All right, so now we're actually gonna press the bearings. And so as you can see, he's got the bolt there, and he's got the bearing on there and the backing plate, and he'll put that through the sprocket side there, because on the other side, we're gonna press the actual ABS bearing here. And of course, that is the rotor side. And again, orange side down and the groove down. And he's gonna kind of slide that into place. And then he'll go on with his washer and that nut. And of course, that is the installer tool that's right up against the bearing there. And just so you remember, this they will refer to as the primary side, because it's the side with the ABS sensor bearing on this particular bike on the rear. All right, and so on both sides, pretty simple, 3/4 inch wrench there. Same for both sides. And he's got a socket on that side, a wrench on the other side. And he is just going to start turning there. And you can see as he's doing that, that bearing is pressing nicely into there. And he's basically just pressing that until it gets really tight like it is there. And of course, he can take a look on the other side and see that that bearing is flush up against there. So now that it's pressed, he's just gonna back it off there, removing the nut there, the washer, and the installer tool. And then he'll remove the rest of the tool there. And we've got that bearing pressed into place. And as you can see, the gray's on the outside because that orange went to the inside. All right, so we spun it around there, and we're going to go ahead. That's the sprocket side. We're going to put the spacer, stock spacer, back in there before we press this side. And he's coming through, of course, with his removal tool there. He's putting the new bearing on there. And like they say, these are Harley bearings, the lettering side out. So there's little letters imprinted on there, and that's facing towards us here to the outside. On with his washer, on with his nut. Okay, and with his 3/4 inch wrench there, and he's got his socket on the other side. He's just cranking it down, and that bearing is seating nicely into place. And he pretty much gave it all he could there, and it looks like it is seated and flush. And now he's going to back things off again, and off with the hardware there, the installer, and you can see that bearing is nicely pressed into place. All right, so on the work table, he has the sprocket, and we're going to remove the bearings out of this. Now, there are two non-ABS bearings inside there, and as I give you a closer look there, you can see the line in there, and that is what you're looking for because that's in between the bearings. They sit on top of each other, and so that's where we'll want the lip of the extractor tool as we're putting it down in there to catch in. All right, and so he's got an extractor tool, and of course it's got that lip on it, and so he's going to place it in there. And just to get it started, just a light tap till he clears the lip there, and then he's going to push it down, looking for that channel. There you go. You heard it snap between the two bearings. All right, now from the other side, he's putting his expander dowel through till it pops out the other side there. This is exactly how it's done on the rear wheel, but we wanted to show you on the sprocket here. And then he's going to put over with his main extractor body there, on with the brass washer, the larger nut, and on with the smaller washer and the smaller nut. All right, and so he's got his 3/8 hex head wrench over there, and he's just using another box end wrench just to kind of give him some leverage. 11/16 socket, and he's putting that over. And of course, 100 inch-pounds torque wrench there, so that we know the expander dowel is properly seated in there. All right, so now we can go ahead and pull the bearing. That's a 5/8 wrench, of course, around the flat spots on the extractor tool there, and just a large crescent wrench on the larger nut. And you can see he's tightening it down, and you can actually turn them together there. You heard it pop. And you can see as he's turning this and letting that sprocket spin around, that bearing is backing out there. And looks like you got it there. All right, now we can pull that out, and there is one of our sprocket bearings. All right, just taking his nuts and washers off there so that we can get the bearing out of there. With everything removed there, he's just got his extractor tool in there. You can just give it a little pop, get that lip off of there, and then you can pull it out. Okay, and now going in for the second bearing that sits inside the sprocket, same exact way down in there. I'm going to clear the lip, and then it should go right underneath the bottom side, that lip. You should hear it snap, and then you can pull up a little bit, and it's plenty secure in there and snug. So one thing you'll note is to get this second bearing, it sits deeper down in there, and this sprocket isn't as wide as a wheel, obviously, so it's just a different setup. And with the hardware on the extractor tool, there's not enough space there for us to hit those flat spots on the extractor portion to get a wrench in there. So we're going to have to actually pound the second set, or the second bearing out. All right, and so the way you pound the second bearing out there is just with a dead blow hammer. You don't want to use a metal hammer, of course. He's just hitting that stock spacer. And you can at least hit that far enough so that you could use the extractor tool the rest of the way. All right, so he's got that bearing pounded out at least halfway there. Now you have to pound pretty hard to get those bearings out. So at this point, he'll go ahead and use the extractor tool and get it all set up to get that bearing the rest of the way out. Just make it easier than pounding away. All right, and you can see now that he pounded that bearing out, at least part way, we have plenty to get the wrench there, the 5/8 wrench on those flat spots in the extractor tool. And he can proceed just like pulling the other bearings. Okay, and he's got the bearing out there. And then that is what the spacer looks like in there. And it does seat in there so it can't fall all the way through. Okay, so we're going to press both bearings back in here. And just a reminder that if you have a non-touring bike, the sprocket is actually bolted to the wheel, and you're only going to have the inside and outside bearing. This is a touring model where the sprocket kind of floats on there with the rubber compensator, so we've got the extra bearing. So he's going to put his spacer back in there. That's his stock spacer. Seats in the lip there. Now we're going to show you here. This is the Jim's installation tool. We've already showed it to you in this video. At the time of this video, we're shooting it. There is an additional part you can buy, and I will link to it in the description below. And it is an adapter for this tool. As you will see, if we were just to put that bolt through the sprocket, there's going to not be enough thread for us. And so we would never be able to get the nuts all the way down and press the bearing in. And because that tool is out of stock everywhere, we're going to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And we're going to use what we have in our current tools, both to extract the bearings, and this is the installation tool. So here's what we've come up with. We're going to put the bearing back on like normal that comes in the kit. You have several of these in your kit. They're different sizes. This is the actual bearing replacement tool. And you've got different sizes. We're just going to use one there as a spacer. We want the 25 millimeter one for our actual bearing. So he's just using it as a spacer. And now he's going to use his actual bearing installation body there as an additional spacer. And it will just fit around the outside of that sprocket and create enough space there. We're going to have to make sure that we have it lined up right so it doesn't slip around, because it's just kind of biting on the outside of that sprocket. But now you can see we've got enough thread. So he's going on with his new bearings. Now, the manual doesn't say anything about which way to face this new Harley bearing. Remember, on the wheel it said the imprinted side out with the lettering. Well, we're going to do the same thing just to keep everything consistent. And so he's going on with the rest of his hardware there, the washer, the nut. He's got his 25 millimeter bearing insertion tool there. What we're going to do now is we're going to take two of us for this, just because one of us can hold the body there on the outside because it's spaced and we don't want it to slip around. And then while I'm holding that, Lurch can actually crank down on that nut on the other side, and we will get this bearing pressed into place. All right, so we've got it at least started, pressed in there. Now just remember your spacers inside there, and so we want to make sure that it's, flush. So he's really going to turn it over and just make sure that spacer is seated properly. The bearing would probably push it into place, but we don't take any chances. We want to make sure it's not cockeyed or anything. And so it can definitely be beneficial to have a second hand to do this. And what we're doing, working together, is we're actually pressing the first bearing all the way down in there. And then we can go on top with the second bearing. Okay, and with that first bearing pressed in there all the way down, he's going to just remove his hardware here. And there's that first bearing pressed down in there. Of course, the spacer is on the bottom side of that. All right, and of course, setting up the exact same way, adapting and overcoming there with that install housing or the body there as a spacer. And again, with the two of us working together, we're able to get the other bearing easily pressed in there. And there we go, both bearings pressed into place there. All right, so with the bearings installed, he's going to go ahead and put the rubber isolator back in the hub here. And you'll see how he's lining up the cutouts with the metal fins there. It does just go one way, so just make sure you have it right there. And now we're ready to reinstall the rear tire on the bike. Do not forget, we have a very detailed video on how to do that. Link in the description below. All right, your journey's not done on the channel. I'm popping a couple videos on the screen here for you. Hopefully some useful or entertaining, heck, maybe both. At any rate, when you're done watching videos, make sure you get out there and ride every chance you get, Bikeaholics. Peace.